All right, let's see. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Warren Boykin, and I'm the Program and Outreach Coordinator for NAMI Northern Illinois, located in Rockford, Illinois. And it's my pleasure to welcome as our guest today to speak about um, anxiety disorders, Nicole Didier. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a couple of things about NAMI. It's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and we are celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. Um, we want you to watch your mail, whether electronic or physical mail, for a Save the Date card. October 9th, 2024, which is during Mental Illness Awareness Week, we're going to be celebrating our 40th anniversary with a dinner at the Embassy Suites, and we hope that you'll be joining us. Our next leading the conversation, by the way, is going to be on youth in crisis, the impact of social media with Kevin Polkey on August the 15th at 12 p.m. over Zoom. And we are going to be having a workshop on nutrition and mental health on August the 20th at 6 p.m. at Real Beautiful You. So watch our webpage, www.naminorthernillinois.org, for more details. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Nicole Didier is a licensed clinical social worker, and as such, Nicole has demonstrated a passion and experience working alongside youth, adults, and couples in navigating their mental health. Areas of focus include depression, anxiety, bipolar, victims of domestic violence, children, whether youth or adult, of divorce, and recovery from addiction. Nicole takes a friendly, upbeat, and yet mindful attitude with all of her clients. Before entering the world of social work, she served for 10 years in various youth ministry settings. Nicole graduated from George Williams College of Aurora University during the first peak of the coronavirus pandemic in May of 2020. She soon dove into serving clients within the Rockford area community through working with Forest City Counseling, a local domestic violence agency, and within the foster care system, serving as a qualified mental health professional. She now serves as a full-time psychotherapist with Forest City Counseling. Nicole is married and enjoys getting to spend time wakeboarding, snowboarding, laughing, being creative with her husband, and spending time with her cats who rule her home. Nicole, we
Yes,
welcome you and we thank you for being here this afternoon.
happy to. Very, very happy to. Awesome. All right. So we'll double clarify. Everyone can see the screen. If you can't, be sure to let me know so I can make sure that you can follow along. So,
Nicole, I guess I should have commented also, um, since this is a webinar, your microphones are not available, those of you in the audience, but you can put any questions that you have into the Q&A. Your chat will only be able to send messages to the host, or it may be disabled entirely. But I think that's everything I had to mention. Nicole, can you think of anything else that we want to mention before we get started?
no, I think that's great. I would say even with that too, you'll have a couple of opportunities to interact, and I want you to, all of you who are logged in and listening and watching, to give yourself permission to participate or to simply just participate by listening and hearing, as different people share things, so making sure to give yourself whatever you need. But I always like to make things a little bit more interactive to break it up. So just want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to be able to do so. So,
All right.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Over to you.
All right. So let's talk about anxiety disorders. That is our focus for today. And when I was thinking about what direction to take, I think especially when we have an hour might seem like a lot of time, but when it comes to especially anxiety disorders, there's a lot to cover. There's a lot of pieces that go into anxiety disorders. It's not just one. Generalized anxiety disorder is typically what we think about, which we'll get into here in a moment. And so, first, wanting to talk about the difference between worry, anxiety, and fear, because they all, yes, are a part of anxiety, but they also look a little bit different. And so, obviously these are things that we all know, but it's different when we look at them under a microscope at the same time. And so worry is dwelling on the difficulty or troubles that lead to a state of anxiety or uncertainty or potential or actual problems. So it's kind of a catalyst. It's a thing that can lead to anxiety. Or another way that when I was doing research for this, the National Institute of Mental Health talks about that it's worry out of control is what anxiety is. So you can have worry that can turn into anxiety, but you can also have just worry. And then there's also fear, which is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous that could likely cause pain or is a threat. And so that also, let's talk about the difference between worry and fear. Worry a lot of times is more kind of looking into the future, something that hasn't happened, right? That potential, but also could be currently, where fear, yes, it could be in the future, but it's more focused on the belief that someone or something, it's much more narrow, is going to be a potential threat. Where anxiety is feelings of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about something that is about to happen. And so that's where the greatest example, I know many people, we're tired of referencing 2020 and the coronavirus and everything that we went through in that season. And yet it was the number one thing that I thought about when preparing for this. Is I talked with a lot of people that when everything happened, it was people who had anxiety were like, why am I not freaking out? Why am I not worried about this? While I see other people, going through this for the first time. And typically that's where you see anxiety, when you think of it in a general sense, is more about something that is far off or in the near future. But then when it actually happens, we can turn around and go, why did I worry about that? Why did I fear that? Why did I have anxiety around that? And so that's where you can kind of see those words used interchangeably. And so what are anxiety disorders? As I had mentioned, that it's far more than generalized anxiety disorder. And so I would love to give any of you who would like to put an answer in the Q&A chat, take a moment to share different types of anxiety disorders that you're familiar with, and we'll read them as they come in. So take a moment now. And any guesses? There's no wrong answer here. We have phobia disorders. Yes. Generalized anxiety disorders. Social anxiety. All three, which yes, are food anxiety. Give another few seconds here. Panic disorder, yes. All right, awesome. Yes, we got over half of them. So when we look at the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5, that is kind of our go-to guide when we're, as therapists or even physicians, as we're looking at anxiety disorders, that this is what we're utilizing. And so yes, a lot of them that were already said. So generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, social anxiety disorder, phobia related. So flying, heights, specific animals, injections, blood, spaces. Those are all specific ones that are referenced in the DSM-5. separation anxiety. Typically you see with children, you can also see with adults as well. Selective mutism, which is essentially when in a situation and not being able to talk, that there's anxiety around that. Anxiety related to medical concerns, which I didn't want to go into it, but there's a couple other diagnoses that also go into that as well that are more specific. Anxiety correlated with substances. I would also put not, that's specifically with drugs influence, that it can lead to a sense of anxiety. But another one that isn't specifically mentioned within the anxiety disorders that someone had mentioned is food anxiety. It very much follows into those diagnoses. And then there's also kind of a catch-all is how I describe it, of other specified or unspecified, but where essentially, again, it's that worry out of control and it's impacting every single day. And so I thank you so much for all of your responses. And I also had thought about wanting to go into the definitions of all of these. That would take up probably half an hour in and of itself. And so that's something that if you have questions about specific diagnosis, we can talk about at the end. Or another thing, and I obviously want to be cautious with this, is if you are curious, like I would say the best option is to Google the diagnosis. So let's say selective mutism is one that I have to constantly go back and read either in my DSM, or you put selective mutism, DSM-5, into Google and read through that, or there's different videos. There's so much that we have access to now that you will see that you can find those answers. Important aspects of anxiety, according to the National Institute of Mental Health, is that the feelings of anxiety does not go away or it gets worse with time. It's super important, right? Because that's where you're seeing the impact on a daily basis. And so, and it's not getting better, or even I think, getting worse. It could be just a constant, ongoing process of feeling anxious. That symptoms negatively interfere with daily activities, right? So that's work, school, relationships, and that's where you'll typically, in the relationship category, you'll see the social anxiety. I had a friend that described earlier last week, she said that she just didn't know that when she gets into social situations, she just doesn't know what to say. And so there might be a physical sensation, but then it's almost like something is blocked off. And so then from that person's perspective can make it feel as if their relationships are being impacted in a negative way, where if they are one-on-one, which is what this friend, she's able to engage in conversations, or if she feels as if she's in a safe environment, that she can even talk about how she feels awkward or feels, like she can't handle interactions. And that the third piece is that these feelings are more than just temporary fear. And I asked another good friend of mine if I could share his story. He has a phobia of flying. And what that looks like for him, right, doesn't go away. It gets worse. They impact his ability to be able to go on vacation. He still is able to go, but at one point was having panic attacks while in the plane. And then even through conversation with him, just talking through, what are you doing beforehand? And he would show us videos. He's like, I know all the ins and outs about the plane. I know how they operate. I watch all of these situations that play out, right? Again, started looking at these videos and researching 2-3 months before and thinking about it, even if it's for a few minutes a day, every single day. And then just this last time was able to be mindful while on the plane, and having a child, I feel like was very helpful for him to be able to focus on having a good time with him. And that's what I encouraged him to do, is, look at it through the lens of a child. And that in and of itself, I think helped, it seemed like. And so what's important to note is when you look at these aspects, it doesn't go away, it impacts our daily life. It doesn't mean that it's not manageable. It doesn't mean that it keeps us from doing things. It just makes it more challenging. There is this case in situations where there are people that do find themselves blocked from being able to do things such as go into social situations or flights or any type of other anxiety. And so I wanted to take a moment here. One of my favorite practices is self-compassion, and the tenets of that are self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. And so I wanted to practice some common humanity right now, just to share in some brief detail about, if you know anyone who's been diagnosed with one of the disorders, or if you yourself have, what your experience has been. Again, just brief, maybe even how it impacts your daily life, or, like my friend's story that, I'm able to go on vacation, but, I find myself, a month, 2 months before, or, like my friend talked about with social situations. So you take a moment, fire away, share your experience if you would like, and I'll keep your names confidential. I'll just share your experience and maybe even tweak if it seems like, just for privacy's sake. So someone said, and you can submit anonymously too. So I want to make sure to say that. I have anxiety, and so does my 9-year-old daughter. We both work hard on calming techniques. Ooh, I'd be curious, what's your favorite calming technique, and what is your daughter's favorite technique? Because those are super, super helpful. I know one is, if you've heard of, it's called box breathing. While I'm waiting to see if they'll respond. So you literally, the common one is 4 seconds. So you draw a box, they make these little stickers that you can put on your computer, or on your desk or something like that. And so you literally go up and you inhale for 4 seconds, and then you hold your breath for 4 seconds, and then you exhale for 4 seconds, and then you hold your breath again, and you do that a few times. So that's one. There's the infinity where you can follow. That's a good one. And calming techniques. Let's see here. All right. So meditation for mom, and for the daughter, it's music. We do the exercise. Oh yes, what you can see, what you can smell, taste, etc. And that works well for my daughter. Another person said, I practice deep breathing and go outside to breathe in the fresh air. Love that. Awesome. Yeah. So 5 things you can see, 4 things you can smell, 3 things you can touch, trying to remember, or 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. Nothing close to that. Yeah. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. Yeah, so finding, it seems like a big way of how people help themselves with anxiety is finding calming techniques, which is very, very helpful. A way that I like to describe it is it's a way of essentially distracting your brain in a healthy way. A lot of us, that when we find ourselves anxious or stressed, you go pick up our phone and doom scroll, right? And then what do we find? We find ourselves not practicing mindfulness. We get more stressed out and more anxious. So yes, especially going outside, getting the fresh air. I know it's hot and it's muggy. Yeah, getting in the sunshine. I recommend, another thing is, we all can use more water. I'm sure, is not even just drinking a glass of water, but drinking it through a straw is also a calming technique as well. All right. I'll give it a few more seconds or minutes. If anyone else wants to share their experience of either having generalized anxiety or a different kind of anxiety. All right. Someone said, oh, yes, this is important. I have anxiety going to the dentist. I can't stand the drill and sweat or pass out almost every time I go to the dentist and get a shot for numbing. I am right there with you. I try to breathe, relax, prepare on the way to the appointment, etc. I listen to music while in the chair and eventually get it under control with breathing and laughing gas. It's super helpful. I have been taking cold showers lately, and it's calmed me down overall in life and in general. Forgot about that one. That's another good one too, because there's something about the shock to your system. You also want to be careful to not go from being super warm to super cold. But yes, that in and of itself can wake up the body in a way. And again, I don't know if this is helpful, but yes, so it's good to trigger endorphins. Yes. Yeah. And so again, just a healthy way to distract our brains to help us in those moments, because I think that's where even too, we won't get in it today, but I saw someone say hoarding disorders, that is real fine under yes, a different kind of anxiety, but in a that would fall under the category more obsessive compulsive. And so that anxiety is a piece of that. Anxiety is also a piece of ADHD. It's a part of depression. It's a part of a lot of diagnosis. And so appreciate all of your responses and how you've managed it. Like that is absolutely amazing. And so proud of all of you. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and sharing what has helped. And hopefully someone in here who hadn't tried some of the recommendations that you had are able to try that and see if that can help their anxiety. So thank you so much. This is why I wanted to do this. So, all right. So we got a long list here. So common signs of anxiety disorders may include, I'll read these here in a moment, but really looking at, it's important as therapists, as clinical social workers, is trained in what's called the biopsychosocial, spiritual, cultural, right? So biologically, that is the number one thing that any therapist or doctor is going to look at when treating an anxiety disorder is, let's first look at, is there any physical symptoms, physical diagnoses that are leading to the anxiety, or is it the anxiety leading to the physical issues? And so that's where you'll typically see testing done, which can be kind of scary, because a lot of people have anxiety, that what's called white coat syndrome is going into the doctor and figuring out what's going on. Typically, you'll see your heart rate be higher, blood pressure. That's me. I know someone that has to monitor their own blood pressure before going in because it's always higher than what it typically is. So looking at the biological, then psychological. So, is there anything going on in the brain and the processing of thoughts and emotions that could be contributing to anxiety? Social, the relationship part, so biopsychosocial, cultural, that which isn't necessarily listed in here, but I think that's important that there can be anxiety around cultural, so also family, ensuring that you're living within the cultural standards that you want to be in, as well as if those potentially clash with your family. Spiritual, self-explanatory. A lot of times those can be a part of it as well, and intermingle also with the social as well. So I'll read these off quickly. So feeling nervous, restless, or tense, sense of impending danger, panic, or doom, increased heart rate. So there's the biological, breathing rapidly or hyperventilating. So it's almost like an elephant is sitting on your chest and it's hard to be able to catch your breath. That can lead into a panic attack, but I think we all have at some point or another, hyperventilating, I feel like can seem as if it's more of this intense experience, but I think it's more common than we realize. Again, biological, sweating, trembling, shaking, feeling weak or tired, trouble concentrating, trouble sleeping, GI problems. This is one of the top ones. This and then and heart related issues are typically the top two that you'll see someone with an anxiety disorder, that if they have a biological experience, that those are going to be the two, the heart and the stomach, leading from anxiety. Difficulty concentrating, which that can also correspond with ADHD, right? The inattentiveness, but really looking at, and that's a hard one that you'll see a lot in females, where it's the other way around, where they got diagnosed with anxiety, but in reality, it's ADHD, but you also can see it the other way around. So kind of that situation of, which came first, the chicken or the egg, the ADHD diagnosis, anxiety, or the other way around. That another sign is avoiding things that trigger. That's where, right, that's going to be that environmental, that potential cultural aspect, and social. Co-occurring depression, which we've talked about, substance use, and it's important, and I don't think I clearly communicated this earlier, is that, alcohol, like putting alcohol into your system or any type of drug, and for some people who utilize cannabis, there are some people who actually, as much as they want to utilize it for calming, can lead them to feel anxious where they typically don't feel anxious. So it's important to utilize that, because that's where you're also, in a way, then that biological piece of the substance impacting the biology. Headaches or chronic pain, that's another one. That is another big one. So the top three: heart, potential issues, GI, and then headaches and chronic pain. And I feel like the best way, right? You even think about anxiety is when I'll talk to people, it's like literally I'll put my arms on the chair and like it's like you're bracing, right? And so then your shoulders, your neck, your head, your jaw, from like here up, you're just gonna have this like sense of tension. And then also social isolation, right? Because especially if you have social anxiety, if you isolate yourself, then you are probably going to have a lower level of social anxiety. And so, which you're also potentially trading one form of anxiety for another, because we also are not made to live in isolation. And then also poor quality of life, right? Poor bio, psycho, social, cultural, and spiritual. All of those pieces are super important. So, risk factors are genetic, environmental. Those are the two areas that we'll be talking about today here. And so genetic factors, this is where, and I was working on this, is trying to make sure to communicate it effectively and clearly. So obviously, a big part is having a history of anxiety or other mental disorders in biological relatives. And not just, I'm learning from Gabor Mate. If you have not heard of him or read Scattered Minds or listened to any podcasts that he's on, highly recommend it. He is challenging my belief and understanding of mental health being impacted by genetics and DNA, that it is, right, nature versus nurture, that debate again, and how important the environment plays into that, right? Because that's part of it, is if you are exposed to anxiety in your home, and the generation before that, it's not necessarily having the diagnosis, it's how it was managed or how it was modeled. And so in my own experience and personal and professional life, is the baby boomers. I feel like my parents are baby boomers. That my parents, I was very, very, very lucky and very, very blessed that mental health was a very important aspect of our lives from as young as I can remember. And both my parents being in counseling and still going to counseling and putting me into counseling when I was young, and just starting to have the conversations. We wouldn't necessarily have a ton of conversation around it. And you're starting to see that with Gen X and millennials now. And then you're seeing also with Gen Z. I am very, very passionate about generational patterns and seeing how that's playing out. And I think it's also important too. Obviously, anxiety and other mental disorders have been around for as long as the human race has existed. To keep in mind, like, cognitive behavioral therapy has only been around since the 1980s. So we really haven't been talking about and prioritizing mental health for very long. That was 10 years before I was born. So it's been under 50 years of us really starting to get serious about mental health. There are other, when you look at genetic, that, you'll have some of those physical, so thyroid conditions, heart arrhythmia, again, that you typically see that can be passed down from one generation to another. So I'm going to make sure, because we have a chat. So repeat the name of Gabor Mate's book. So Scattered Minds. So that specifically is more towards ADD. At the same time, I think you still could get a lot out of it. And I need to read some of his other material as well. So excellent, excellent material. And again, challenging of that nature versus nurture when it comes to mental health. Risk factors with our environmental, right? So this is getting more into what Gabor really emphasizes on. I didn't reference him in this presentation or didn't utilize specific material from him, but kind of have that in my ear thinking about what he has said. So yes, so environmental factors include exposure to stressful and negative environmental events, childhood or adult trauma. So, and it's important too, when it comes to trauma, that it's abuse experienced or witnessed to traumatic events. And if you've had any training or any exposure to trauma and understanding what that is, that at times it can be actually worse for a child or someone who witnesses the abuse in comparison to experiencing it, because they in a way their brain has to find a way to process it. And what we know about thoughts is that even if we don't experience it, our brain will treat it as if we are experiencing it. And so stress due to illness, whether that's chronic or, like different diagnosis for seasons of life, or even sometimes people, like there are people who have a fear of throwing up. I don't know how they do this. This is disgusting to talk about in a presentation. At the same time, I don't know about anyone here that are fascinated by people who like can make themselves not get sick because the anxiety is so great that they are determined to not do it. I think, that can be a risk factor. If you are someone who is go, 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 you are driven, even a cold or any type of virus or anything like that can lead to anxiety because of all, right? You think about the near future. When am I going to be able to get this done? How am I going to be able to focus on this? If I'm sick, like I don't have time to rest. How many of us have said that to ourselves? And then also stress buildup, small moments build up to experience of anxiety. And this makes me think of, I actually have not read it yet, but I have listened to the podcast episode. It's Brene Brown, and she interviews the Nagoski twins, Amy, and I can't remember her sister's name, but the book is Burnout. It literally on the cover says burnout, 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 burnout. And when I think about the stress buildup, the way that they described it in the podcast, and it was a couple of years ago, is that if you have stress that's built up to here, you need to have at least up to here, if not more, to be able to compensate for your stress. And so, if your stress is up to here and you compensate it with going out to dinner with friends, working out, drinking water, eating healthy, there's still going to be, right, this buildup. And then it essentially becomes a pile over time. And that's the best way, the best image that I can think of when it comes to stress buildup, the small moments built up to experiences of anxiety. And so again, that's Brene Brown interviewing the Nagoski twins, and the book is Burnout. And so highly recommend looking at that. And then another risk factor is that this typically starts in childhood while also throughout the lifespan. And so where you see that is the shyness or feeling distressed or nervous in new situations, right? So kind of that stranger danger, also that talking about that diagnosis of being away from the caregiver, right? So when you think about dropping the kid off to school for the first time and the kid's crying and it takes a few days for them to be able to feel comfortable to go to school, or maybe it is a daily task. Maybe some of you sitting here either had a child or have children now that it just breaks your heart or is frustrating and irritating. But seeing that maybe that could be a potential diagnosis of anxiety. And another important piece too is that it could be the personality of the child, especially when you think about the social aspect. Is it that they have social anxiety? Is it because they're introverted? Is it both? Is there some sensory processing that leads to anxiety? And this is where it is so, so important to get the most accurate diagnosis to be able to help whoever is struggling. And then other mental disorder or mental health disorders can play into this. Again, like I said, ADHD or depression, or you'll see a lot in autism spectrum disorder of, in the hyperfixation that, they might get stuck in it. And then you start to see symptoms of anxiety, PTSD. I could list off so many from the DSM. And then, as we talked about earlier, drug or alcohol use are also, I would put in the category of environmental. And it could even be as simple as going out for a casual dinner and you're not wanting to drink, and yet you feel as if, there is that pressure to drink, even if no one else is encouraging you to do so, or, with any other substance. It's important to recognize that can influence, which is why you'll see people who are in recovery that they choose for that to not be one of their environments, because it will either lead to a great level of anxiety and more so that they will relapse. And so they choose to change their environment to make sure that there aren't environmental factors that will trigger the desire to want to use. All right. So again, wanting to break things up a little bit. And so when you think about, and I can go back to the risk factors, What are some that you know of or that you like either have experienced yourself in regards to anxiety, and how have you chosen to deal or not deal with those symptoms? So let's see here. Yeah. So history of anxiety within the family, like would you like, when you think about sharing, like I know there was a parent and a child, right? So that right there you're seeing, in the biological piece of the family. Is there any physical conditions that you know of that you have or others have that have led to an anxiety disorder? Or environmental? How would you say? And again, anonymous, as generic or limited as you want, but just giving an opportunity to practice that common humanity once again, because anxiety disorders are difficult to talk about. I think we can all kind of have like a blanket, like, yeah, I have anxiety, or yes, I have, stress or different things like that. But it's another thing to kind of zoom in and share. So I'm going to give anyone who has thoughts, and if not, that's okay too. So again, what risk factors you've experienced and how you have managed them. That's all good. All right, so experience of trauma, 3 kinds of cancer, including thyroid cancer, history of mental health issues in family, and a way to work with that is counseling, medication, etc. Another person shared having chronic pain, definitely drugs and alcohol influence. Thank you so much. Again, this is a very vulnerable spot. And so thank you so much to the 3 of you who have shared so far. I have a tendency to get angry when upset and like to throw things. Now I freeze containers of water and throw the ice on the ground when angry, all the payoff, but no cleanup. I love that. Right. And yeah, that's another thing. You could even just share how you manage your risk factors. I know another one that people will share is they will either go into counseling or they will go into educating and learning for themselves how to break the cycle, right? Or to change the cycle of what the environment will look like. And so maybe it might be growing up in a hectic, busy home to creating a very calm, emotionally regulated space. Yes. And then, yes, see many similarities with parents with anxiety and depression, also substance abuse with alcohol. On my father's side, I was just diagnosed at 33 with ADHD and have seen others on my mother's side also diagnosed with it. Yep. It's a big one right now. I'm wondering when the epidemic of adult female ADHD diagnosis is going to start tapering, and I don't know if it will anytime soon. Yep, majored in social work, minored in psychology to try to figure it out. Yep, that's my story too. And it's very interesting because for me, I could share, I thought about sharing a little bit of my story, but I had to deal with my own anxiety and because I was one in my 20s. I was like, I am definitely going to be able to overcome anxiety, right? Like my dad and my mom have dealt with anxiety. Like I'm going to be different. And then I thought I was having a heart attack and went to the ER and found out I had a panic attack instead. And I was very grateful. And I still do not remember this doctor's name, but they said, hey, I'm diagnosing you with generalized anxiety disorder. And something that's important to know is that if you don't get a handle on it now, you could be back in here with heart issues. I will never forget that. I was 26 years old and very, very grateful for the bluntness and also the kindness of that doctor to share that with me. So it's very humbling, but it also has led to, sometimes it is going back to school and being able to be that person to empathize with and understand. I have 2 Bernie Doodles who are therapy dogs, and Olive is one of them. And I say she works best with anxiety clients because she can empathize with them. She gets it. And she also has a little bit of anxious attachment too. She's in the corner right now. So all right. Thank you so much for everyone sharing. We're gonna keep moving on. All right. So prevention. Something that is just super important is being able to look at 3 different levels of care. This is something that was discussed when I was in grad school and something I reference on a daily basis, almost, not necessarily every single day, but pretty close, is primary, secondary care, and tertiary. This was also on my exam. And so it's very, very important. I think you primarily will hear more conversation in the language around this in more of a physical health aspect. And I think and want to challenge that the mental health that we do the same. And so primary care, first level of healthcare, your general physicians, nurse practitioners, pediatricians that focused when an individual is like health or has illness that comes up and comes and goes on occasion, a checkup or check-in, focus on keeping anything long-term from happening or worsening. And when we look at it from an anxiety perspective, is again, first step, so if I have clients that come in, they're like, I am wanting to address anxiety, I encourage them and ask them, have you talked with your primary care? Let's just look at it first, not to scare you or anything like that. I still will have conversation. I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to meet with you until you go to the doctor, because I think that can create a whole other level of conversation around anxiety. But that also can be, if they do have an understanding of their general health, that primary care can be essentially a sense of maintenance when it comes to mental health, when it comes to any type of anxiety disorder. And again, checking in, what does it look like for you? Like how has anxiety manifested in this last week in your relationships, and around food, around, how did the dentist go? That's where we're going to have that conversation. Or, before going to the dentist, or before going to the doctor, or before giving a presentation. I have a client that is avoiding wanting to sign up for college classes because there was one class that they knew they were going to have to give presentations. And so we talked about that. And so it's important, to be able to do that. In primary care, it's very, very helpful, because when you move to the next level, secondary care, there is a probability of longer term concern going on that needs extended treatment or care, including diagnostic testing, inpatient or outpatient care, same-day surgery, et cetera, right? So again, from a physical perspective, that there might be someone who has, like I said, those GI issues, chronic migraines, heart issues, and I'm not saying that they didn't deal with their anxiety first. It can be a part of it. And so they might start, and I've had referrals from this, that they do have one of those 3 physical issues, and they start to come and they meet with me, and then we work through that, and we get to where even just talking around their anxiety can be super helpful. And so helping to not only just manage the physical symptoms and that secondary care of long-term chronic pain, but then hoping that you can see it move to primary care. It may stay in the secondary, but ideally seeing if we can get it to maintenance. And then tertiary care requires expertise and use of highly specialized equipment that can only be found in hospital settings, invasive surgeries, complex treatments, or long-term stay for best care, right? So that's where you're going to see more of cancer treatments or MS, or, where there has to be ongoing maintenance in order to help keep someone alive. They may not necessarily be dying, but tertiary does include terminally ill. And so being able to essentially keep the person to comfortable and being able to still feel as if they have a sense of normalcy. And so that's where, when it comes to anxiety disorders, if we can jump in that primary stage, it can help keep the secondary and tertiary at bay for the most part. Obviously, there are situations and physical conditions that are out of our control that we don't necessarily know will pop up. But when looking at it from the perspective of anxiety disorders, that's really where we want to see people. And even too, when you think about someone who can't even get out of their house because of, you'll see that typically more with like OCD, where they have to do a certain pattern of things. or so socially anxious that they can't get or don't want to leave their house or leave their bed, or depression, you'll see that as well. And then obviously, like, if there's attempted suicide or self-harm, that's going to lead more into that secondary care with intensive outpatient afterwards, and in hopes of bringing that back to the level of primary care. So some prevention examples specifically for anxiety disorders. And before I jump into that, I love this quote from I believe is the National Institute of Mental Health, that your worries may not go away on their own, and they may get worse over time if you do not seek help. See a doctor or a mental health provider before your anxiety gets worse. It's easier to treat if you get help early. And so that's where early intervention is super important, with getting in with a counselor, psychologist, or psychiatrist, and as well as a primary care. And I think it is super helpful, but also can be a little scary, or create a block where getting an assessment for generalized anxiety disorder and walking through that when you're with your general practitioner, with a psychiatrist, with a psychologist, with a doctor, with someone to walk through that with you, just to understand and using it. It's super, super, super important, is that it is a guide. It's not an end all be all. It does not define who you are. It's helping you to understand what is going on, and figuring out, then discussing coping skills, as well as verbally processing experiences. So if we have an understanding specifically of like generalized anxiety disorder, or a certain type of phobia, or the social anxiety, is okay, so in these situations, this is specifically what's happening, getting it out of your head through your mouth, being able to hear someone share their responses. And a lot of times it is empathy. It's I'm so sorry this has happened, and this has to be so hard for you. And maybe even sometimes verbalizing it helps us to see things through a different lens, and feel like it's more manageable than we thought it was when we just had it in our head. And so then too, is also, if the patient desires and wants to try medication, that is a conversation to have with general practitioner, psychiatrist, and then if it's with a counselor or a psychologist, getting a referral to either a doctor or a psychiatrist. And so we have a question up here of, can an eating disorder be classified as an anxiety disorder? I think that's where it's a little tricky when it comes to an actual diagnosis. I think, yes, it can be, but I feel like that could be a whole presentation in and of itself. So I don't want to dig too much into that, but yes, it definitely could. Another piece is stay positive, but also not toxic positivity either. I think it's important to, or stay active, not positive. I apologize. So staying active, not just with physical activities, but also hobbies, art, horticulture, working garden, plants, different things like that, working out. Yes, is a part of it. And then also social engagements. And then obviously being mindful and being present with yourself, and meeting yourself where you're at when it comes to social engagements, if you do have social anxiety. And then another thing that can be difficult and challenging is avoiding substance use, alcohol, cannabis, any other type of drugs. I think even too, it's not technically a substance, but I think we're seeing that more and more, is also any type of gambling is important too, because it can be a cause of anxiety and can worsen existing anxiety. And another part is that I didn't put on here that I misread on my slide, is to be positive. It is important to be able to do that, just to encourage and empower yourself. So, all right, when to reach out. When do you intervene? When you find yourself worrying to the point that it's interfering with your daily life and activities. And even that, even if it's not the majority of the time, but it's bothersome, or you notice it, or someone else notices it, and you're in agreement with them that maybe you hadn't realized, reach out then. The level of anxiety that you feel seems to be difficult to control, right? So feeling a sense of out of control, not that you want to be able to, like I say, I have a fidget that trying to control our anxiety is like trying to, any of you from the 90s, 2000s, you know this. So, right. But like the more you try to control it, the more it slips out of your hands. And so that's a time to reach out. It seems as if anxiety is linked to physical health issues, and that in and of itself is also going to create anxiety as well. Feelings of depression, use of alcohol and or drugs to relieve anxiety symptoms. That's a tricky one, I understand. And then also suicidal thoughts or behaviors. And then someone here just asked, which I'm going to hold on to that question because we're almost done here. I want to make sure to give some time for some Q&A as well. But love the question. So we will get to that here in a second. And then I wanted to share some resources. So I'm gonna need some help in here because I want to actually show you. I have the page or a few of the 3 of the 4, because Calm, I feel like most people know, are an app, but I wanted to share some resources. And it was interesting is the ones I wanted to share are very interactive. And I think when you think about anxiety, there is a certain energy. And so I think it is good and a lot internally. And one of the best ways to deal with anxiety is to, do something with it and to get it out. And so here we go. Please tell me if you can see my screen. You might not be able to, but I wanted to risk it and try it anyways. Let's see. Anyone tell me, can you see it? It's the big activity for anxious people. All right, let's see here. Yes. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I thought it was fun. It's like, it can be a big coloring activity book. Like it's literally like for kids, but for people with anxiety. So anxiety is my cardio. You could color that in. All about me. Draw your face here. Tell me more. You earn different points to access your totally scientific anxiety profile. Top 5, what are your biggest fears? Being eaten by wolves, getting a B+, axe murderers, 10% battery. So you can do different things like that. I thought that was fun. And then here's another one, how we feel. This is my number 1. I love it so much. Mark Brackett wrote a book called Permission to Feel. And this app, you can have it alert you for 1 to up to 4 times a day to check in and see where you're at emotionally. And yeah, it's a journal for your well-being. So you track your emotions. And so this is kind of what it looks like in the app, but then it also has a definition of each emotion. You spot patterns. So you check in, during the day and kind of see if you have a trend of where you feel certain emotions. And yeah, it's a nonprofit. And so it is free, made possible by donations. And so super, super grateful for both Android and iPhones. I have been waiting for a while for my Android user clients and friends, but it is here and it is lovely. And then I don't think she's in college anymore, but I absolutely love this journal. And she has a bunch of different ones. So a silly little journal for my silly mental health is, it's cute, but also serious. But there's some other ones too that you can buy off of Etsy. And so again, like a check-in, how you're feeling, self-care, what's on your mind, rate the day. Yeah. And again, some more interactive exercises as well. So just to not zoom in, because I think sometimes when we can start thinking about anxiety, we just then start to loop, and then that can not be helpful too. So yeah, so alrighty, let's see here. So yes, thoughts, questions we have here. Let me go. Here we go. So someone asked, is dating anxiety a subset of social anxiety or a whole other issue? I see a lot of teen clients who are beyond preoccupied, anxious about significant other concerns. As far as the diagnosis goes in the DSM, I am not sure about that. I'd have to look into that, but I would, peek into, your DSM-5. Otherwise, it's, if you go through the diagnostic for you yourself, not necessarily with clients unless you feel it would be helpful. And to have a conversation around it is, if those categories meet the diagnosis of social anxiety. I think it's also important to look that I'm guessing that they probably are experiencing it in other areas of their life that may, especially with teenagers, they may not be aware of. Or it potentially might not be technically a diagnosis of that, but just with the stage of life that they're in, right? Because you look at the different stages of development, Erik Erikson, that would be a huge reference that if you haven't already looked at, I feel like sometimes I'm like, wait, I need to go back and read this and see. Or Kohlberg's stages of development, I think, are another great resource to go look back on and kind of see if that matches up with what you're referencing. And then same person said 741 is a good resource for text happy clients. Love it. All right. Any other thoughts or questions? We'll be wrapping up here with a couple more minutes.
Nicole, I was just wondering with some of the wonderful references that you include in your presentation, um, maybe when you send the notes over or your slides to share, uh, if you'd be able to list some of those references in the back.
Yeah, and in the part of why I love to use Canva is like how I just did. If you you just download the presentation and it should, I'll make sure it's sent over. You just literally click on that picture and it'll take you right to either Amazon or to Etsy or directly to like the How We Feel app or the Calm app. So I wanted to make that easy.
Yeah, some of those Amazon references were great. Some of the resources that you indicated
Yeah.
looks like they're readily available if you know where to look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Etsy especially, I feel like sometimes I've found more off of Etsy than I have even on Amazon, which then is awesome because you're supporting small shops too, which I absolutely love. There was at one point the interactive journal, she closed down her shop because she had, well, for a moment till she had more ready to go because she had sold out of like nearly everything. And so she's like, I need some time to get some more things in stock to be able to offer to people. So I love it. That's fun.
That's a resource that I hadn't really thought of. I mean, it could be a generational thing, but it's nice to have a younger person like yourself who is familiar with what's going on social media, or some of the resources that are available out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Well,
even like the one person had shared that I am going to have to look into that because I don't know if I've seen, yeah, like just, I don't know if you just text 741 with it being a good resource for text happy clients.
I believe so. I'm not sure where that is, and maybe the person who put that in can
Yeah.
kind of give us a little heads up on what 741 really is.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'm gonna look it up here. So, oh, crisis text line. Okay. Thank you, Danielle.
Uh, Again, the younger people. I know she was out there.
Didn't know it. I feel like I should. Now I do. So,
Yeah, well, we learn something new every day. And it's thanks to wonderful people like you who work in our community. Uh, for city counseling, I believe you said,
yes. Yep.
is where people can uh, get a hold of you. And we will be uploading this presentation as well as your previous one on ADHD in case anyone missed that one. Um, it was a knockout. I have to give you tons of credit, and we really thank you so much for being here, as well as I may have neglected to thank all of our people who put in great uh, comments and attention to this presentation.
Absolutely.
Well, join us again. As I mentioned before, our next presentation will be um, August the 15th at 12 noon. Uh, Youth in Crisis, the Impact of Social Media with Kevin Polkey of KP Counseling. So we want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you, Nicole. Hope you have a great day.
Yep, you too.